And so I'm tapped in here with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, please introduce yourself and let people know who you are and what brings you to the stage today.
All right. Well, hey everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I am a sixth-year math teacher. I currently teach in Long Island, but I've taught in the city as well. And I'm just here, fighting for our kids. Fighting for them to have the same. I know I get stressed out, so if y'all see me bust a tear, just it's okay. But just fighting for them to just have equity. We know that if you teach black and brown children, even if you don't teach them, the reality in America is that our kids are not treated equally. They're not getting the same advantages of their white counterparts rather. And so I'm really just here to, you know, try and push to make sure that we give our kids the best education that they can get, one step at a time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Most of you, we've had conversations, but for those of you that may not know me, my name is Bobby. Been an educator here for the last 10 plus years, say about 11. I've been in middle school math for pretty much my entire career. Um, and excited to dive into this important conversation. For me, I started Liberation Lab as a means, a vehicle, so we could begin to see internal and external accountability. What I mean is, I want to empower our families to start holding these schools accountable for the equitable education that these kids deserve. And I also want to see that happen in classrooms so teachers can feel empowered to actually do the work. And so I think this conversation is a valuable one. Um, and we kind of got brought here by a post that you did on TikTok that kind of resonated with some folks. Why don't you let the people know about that thing?
Yeah, so it's posted on Instagram as well, but I was just like at this point where I'm just like tired of white people. And I know that that sounds crazy because it's not all of them.
Right.
And so I feel like a big part of this is knowing that if it's not you, then we're not talking about you, but that you have work to do too. And so I was just tired of like this. Every time I post something, it was just like, oh, racism isn't real, oppression isn't real, and I was just tired. Like I was tired, and so I made this TikTok, and it wasn't even anything crazy because I don't even know how to use TikTok. It was like my first real TikTok, and it literally said like, dear white people, it is not our responsibility to dismantle these oppressive systems. It's yours. And because I don't know how to use TikTok, right? Like I didn't even know these people were commenting. And so somehow, like I think at one point, like a notification came up on the top of my screen, like you have, 600 something comments. I was like, what? Like I've never had 600 comments on anything in my life. So I went and I looked and I just like, as I was scrolling through them, I was like, yo, this is real. Like it's 2021 and y'all are telling me that like things have changed. And some of the comments were really, it was just they were, and honestly offended.
Uh-oh. Hey, Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Hear me?
Uh-oh. Your internet is cutting out. Your internet not letting you be great.
Can you hear me now? No, you can't hear me.
Yeah, you're good. You're
Can you
in.
hear me? Okay. I might have to switch
You're
rooms,
good.
but you can hear me now. Good. No.
You're coming in and out a little bit.
Let me switch rooms. Give me like 1 second.
No problem. While she does that, listen, I think that part of this conversation is going to be very, very good for all of us because I think that in our educational sectors, it is easy for all of us to feel like we have just been gaslit, if that makes sense, right? Like people will tell you that what you see, yeah, no, wouldn't let it be great. People will tell you that what you see and what you're identifying isn't what you see. And you'll start to think that you're crazy for what it is that people are doing, right? Uh, you see inequities existing in your work of, your place of work, and you'll point it out, and people will look at you and say, "No, that's not what that is." So much so to the point where you think, yo, maybe it's me. Now, I don't know about you, but that's been my experience, right? So it wasn't until I connected with good people like the Black Girls Teach. It wasn't until I connected with Rakim from the Insightful Teacher. It wasn't until I connected with these other entities and people who were already doing this that I was like, oh, it's not me. I'm not crazy. And so, if you're here and you're in that space and you recognize it, listen, you're not crazy. It is what you saw. And there are tangible things that we can do to better each other and hold each other through this, because it's a very difficult process to be in. So while she is joining and trying to tap back in, I wanted to make sure that I highlighted a couple of things. First, the first question that we had on the bugging. The first question we had was, why does it seem so hard for people to discuss race, particularly our white counterparts? Why does it seem so hard for people to discuss race? Let me hear some things in the comments, but I'll tell you my thoughts as you're chiming in. I'll give you a perfect example. So at the place that I work at, we had a conversation. The conversation was about the events of January 6th. And on January 6th, we saw a lot of things transpire. Um, and when I look back on that date, all I can see is, again, and I shout out to Jordy. She was on Insightful Teacher Tuesday talking about this, but it was like, yo, these people are living free, right? These people are actually allowed to walk into the nation's capital, tear stuff up, and then hold their hands and guide them back down those steps. It is amazing to me.
Okay.
Hey, you're back.
I am back. I am sorry. Hold on 1 second. I knew this was gonna happen. I was hoping it didn't, but
we're just chopping it up about why it's hard to discuss race.
okay.
And I was just talking about how in my school we had a conversation about the insurrection, and literally people could not agree that it was a racist act. Like they couldn't even name that as racist, which is just mind blowing to me, right? But um, yeah, so I wanted to pose that to you. Why do you think it's so hard for people to discuss race, particularly our white counterparts?
I feel well. One, we've been having this conversation. I feel like almost every day now, right? I think that um, it requires them to acknowledge their privilege. And I think in acknowledging their privilege, which they know exists, but once you acknowledge it, it kind of requires you to do something about it. And a part of that doing something is giving up some of that privilege, right? So like they act like this system doesn't exist. There's no, these things are not real because ultimately they are benefiting from it. And
Hmm.
so to acknowledge it would mean to give up some of that privilege. And so they don't want to do that. Why?
Yeah,
It doesn't benefit them to give up some of that privilege. It doesn't benefit them to acknowledge that um, they have privileges that they have not worked for that just come to them. You know,
yeah,
they have advantages rather that they didn't do anything for, right? It is a privilege to be white, right? It's a privilege not to have to walk down the street and someone cross the street just because you're a black male or female, right? In certain neighborhoods, in gentrified neighborhoods, right? Our
right.
neighborhoods that y'all came into, and now you're scared. So I don't think that it's hard. I think it's a decision, and I think it's an easy decision for them because ultimately they get to keep that privilege. If they act like it doesn't exist. If they act like it's not real, what is there to work on for them?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so key, right? Because the acknowledgement of a privilege or the acknowledgement of an advantage for anybody who has a heart is going to require that you do something about the injustice that you see. And so either one, I choose not to acknowledge it because I choose not to do anything, or two, I'm really that vile of a person, right? There's really no in between. And I think it's interesting because when I've uh, when I've had these conversations with some of my white counterparts, and we talk about race or whatever, they will choose to acknowledge every other ism but racism, right? They'll say, you know, when you grow up poor, right? So they'll talk about classism. Uh, they'll talk about every other thing, and then choose not to acknowledge race. And I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this has to do with the fact that if I can acknowledge some anything else but racism, it doesn't tie itself back to me. I can point to everything else and say, "Oh no, these I'm dealing with it too, right? I grew up poor and I'm white, so therefore, no, I don't have white privilege." And it's like, okay, but like privilege doesn't necessarily mean that you grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth. It just means that your race isn't a deterrent to you having access to things, right? It is so hard for people to dive into those conversations. Has that been your experience too?
I mean, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, it's like, oh, I'm not a bad person because I acknowledge these other things. But like, it's so difficult for you to acknowledge that, racism is really a thing. And one of the things I was going to say about the comments that I have received, literally by the time I got onto TikTok and I was able to see like these comments, right, that I didn't even know existed. No lie, there at that point it was, and this was like a couple days ago. It was like 600 and something comments, literally of people saying like I was racist for the comment that it's
Right.
not our job. Whose job is it? Black people just want handouts. Someone said, I bet you she's on welfare looking for, and I was like, first of all, I got 2 degrees, bro. Like, don't come for me. But I didn't even, for me at the time, it wasn't even worth like commenting back. But no, I think it is. I think it's this, and once again, it's the privilege, right? Because you don't have to acknowledge it, but we have to acknowledge our race, our color, the color of our skin every single day, like, because that is how we are identified. That's how we're looked at. That's the first thing people see when they see us. And so once again, it just goes back to their privilege of being able to do it. And I think it is this idea of like, oh, well, I'm a good person. So no, you're not. Actually, you're not a good person because you see these things happening. You see the reality, and forget doing something about it, right? Because that's an action, but you're not even acknowledging that it's real, and it's so disrespectful. That like ultimately, like I really want to fight people. Like it makes me angry because it's like this is real. Like this is our
Yeah.
real lives. And I was sharing with you earlier, like as I'm doing all this research and some work and whatever. Like I was getting emotional because I'm like, yo, it is 2021 and we're just still fighting for equity. Like, first of all, can we get equality? We don't even have that, right? Like, let's not get to equity yet. We don't even have equality. We are not even being treated equally, let alone given the things that we need to be successful, right? That's the equity part. But we're not even being treated equally. And the fact that you can't acknowledge that, nah, I want to fight you. Like that's how it
Yeah.
makes me feel. It makes me
Yeah.
so angry.
Yeah. And it's almost like, right, we were having this discussion earlier, but like if I don't know if any of you who's listening have been in this situation, but like it's like when you really care about somebody and you really are like in a deep committed relationship with them, at least you think it is, right? And you care more deeply for the person than they do for you. So like in that situation, what you tend to do is fill in the blanks, right? They're not calling because maybe they got hung up. They're not visiting as often because maybe, right? And we fill in the blanks. Like love will cause you to fill in the blanks. But I think in a more on the opposite way, right? When you choose not to acknowledge your privilege, when you choose not to understand what's really happening, it'll cause you to look at someone who puts up a video on TikTok that says, hey, it's your responsibility to dismantle oppressive systems. There's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing vile about that, but you'll look at it and then start filling in the blanks based off of your biases. Oh, maybe she's the person that's on welfare, right? Because that's really what I think about Black people,
Yeah.
not knowing that the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action, welfare are they're white,
No.
right? But
Yeah.
we get the the short end of the stick on that one because ultimately that's all Black people, right? We're just poor, helpless Black people. We got to come in and help them, right?
We were just looking for a handout. The government didn't give you enough. I was just reading through. I'm like, yo, y'all are crazy, and you're not worth the time of my response. But
Mm.
it is. That's the reality. Is like it's easier to not acknowledge it so that you don't have to do it. You don't have to lose any of that privilege. You like the society that we're in because you benefit. So you know.
Yeah,
Um.
yeah, absolutely.
So okay. Why do you think it is important to have these conversations about race, equity, with our students?
Wow. Right. I think about it this way. So, the school that I serve at is 81% Hispanic, about 18% uh, Black, and then like 1% uh, Asian. So, like, we have like all ethnic minorities in our school in the middle of a place that's been what Dr. Khalifa, who I'm reading now, would say is a minoritized community, right? These things have happened to cause this. Like the hood is not an accident, right?
Mhm.
And in the midst of all of that, what I find is that our schools have a very much so colonized mindset as it comes to do this education thing. So what our schools will do is come in and try to, in the name of education, not value the community that it's serving as a resource, but it'll come in and try to train the community in whiteness. This is how you're supposed to act. We're going to call that professionalism. This is what you're supposed to wear. We're going to call that a dress code, quote unquote, or we're going to put uniforms on you because this is what it's, all about, right? And so if we don't have the conversations with our kids, then we are effectively going to allow them to acquiesce who they are for whiteness because ultimately that's the easiest way to move forward, right? We're asking them to rid themselves of all of who they are in the name of what we now call education, which is really just, you know, whiteness with a curriculum in front of them.
Yeah, and I think too, like it just reminded me. I don't know if this was today or yesterday. We were talking, so we have our lunch break pull up on Clubhouse, and so we just pull up and we talk about any old thing, right? And Ben is here. Hey Ben,
Hey
um,
Ben.
Ben made a statement, and it really clicked for me. Like Ben was talking about race with his children, and it just reminded me that like not everyone does that, right? Like not all parents are having these conversations of equity with their kids. They're actually from their behaviors teaching their children right how to be racist or how to live this world of white supremacy and how to continue to benefit from it. And so for me, one of the things that I think about when I'm like, well, why is it important to have these conversations with our kids, our students, is because they're not learning it anywhere else. Some of
Mm,
them are not seeing this anywhere, right? And I'm talking about like our white students, our non black, indigenous children of color, right? they're not they're not being exposed to these things, and your behaviors are a replication of what you have learned, right? Behaviors are learned. They're learned from your parents, your environment, society, whatever. Society's already teaching you that how to be white supremacist. That's just naturally happening. But I feel like if they're not learning it anywhere else, they should see it in schools. And it can look like so many different things in schools, right? I'm not saying in a school we should be like, well, white people are bad, because that's not true. Not all white people are bad, and not white all white people are racist, right? But we all have to do the work, and I feel like when we have these conversations in schools, whether it's with our black and brown students, of teaching them how to advocate for themselves, because the world is not here for them. Like this is not the society that we're just going to naturally benefit from. Or whether it's teaching your white students, the world that is created for them to be benefiting, and to flourish, and how they can do their part in um, making this world just a better place. And that starts at acknowledging that there is privilege and that they do have privilege. So,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to shout out what Dr. Renee said in here. She said black students are not being exposed to their history either, right? And so what we have is these is this is the shrewd effect of our educational system as it's built, right? If I divorce the black people from and indigenous people from their history,
yep.
right, while simultaneously continuing to put out white normality as what we aspire to, then I'm ripping people away from who they truly are while telling them the lie that whiteness built, right? It is the height of privilege to I saw this was on CNN, so real time, right? So
Mhm.
after the insurrection happened, the gentleman that was in the picture holding the podium with the wave, and
Mhm.
he was smiling and all of that, he had two lawyers, by the way, pretty reputable lawyers, who took on his case. And they asked him, well, why? I think it was Cuomo asked him, why would you defend this man? Why him? And the lawyers proceeded to say, this is one picture. This doesn't represent all of who this is. And immediately in my mind, I thought of Ahmaud Arbery, Eric Gardner, right? Um, Oscar Grant, and the list goes on, where just one picture, just one video, and all of a sudden people are making judgments about that person. But when it's a white person in front of the screen, we don't do that at all. We there is an assumed innocence when it comes to whiteness. And I think because we exist in this system that continues to put this out, right? This conveyor belt, if you will, then we have to be actively working against it if it's ever going to mount up in our favor, right?
Yeah.
We have to work against it, or it's going to continuously come up. Breonna Taylor, thank you, Dr. Renee, right?
Yep.
Breonna Taylor, I had a dear friend, and I'll say this and I'll let you go. I had a dear friend of mine who tried to tell me that Breonna Taylor, her life was just messed up. She was involved with drugs and this and that. And I'm like, how do you know that? Right? Like if you get your news from quote unquote conservative news reports and you don't ever critically think and you don't ever get other sources and cite and you don't ever do any of the critical thinking work that needs to happen in these spaces, then of course to you that's what she is, right? Because there's always an assumed guilt when it's a white face.
But even if
I
that
mean,
was
when a black
true,
face. Go ahead.
even if that was true, however that is so disrespectful, first of all.
Extremely.
But even if it was true, everything that they said was true. At the end of the day, this woman was in her bed asleep. Period. Right? So none of that even matters. While completely false, right? None of it matters because at the end of the day, they came into her house and she got shot and she died. And the only charges were for the bullets that missed.
That missed. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, none of who she was, which is not what this person is describing, none of that mattered. It did not matter. But like you said, there's this, when you see black people, there's this assumed guilt, like straight. There's no innocent until proven guilty. It's you are guilty because that's what black people do, right? That's how things are looked at. And the reality is we saw what we saw in that picture. Nobody has to put the pieces together. Nobody has to figure out what happened. My guy, you broke in. You took it. You can't, like, there's no denying that. So that's
Right.
not who you are. So you're not a thief.
Right.
You didn't, like, it didn't happen. It really infuriates me because it just continues to show that we live in a society that perpetuates whiteness. And white
Yep.
and white is innocent and black is guilty. And think about all of these kids who got shot unarmed walking away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I don't know.
And I think that's part of the mission, right? For all of us educators who are in these spaces, who have the opportunity, the great opportunity to shape a black, indigenous people of color, whoever that is, mind, whoever has the opportunity to do that, you have the opportunity to shape an activist, a world changer, someone who will see greatness in themselves that the world so badly wants to rob, that whiteness so badly wants to rob. And so I think that, to what Dr. Renee's point, right, is that it is going to take a collective conscious. And the only way we do that is if we start in schools talking about critical thought with what's going on. You don't have to reach far for a curriculum.
Yep.
Literally, all you got to do is turn on the TV and look at what's happened over the last 4 years and even before, right? You don't have to look far for subject matter. And so I think that brings up a valuable question. And that is, what is the value of having these discussions before the work begins? What is the value in having these discussions before the work begins?
Um, I think one, like the work is so valuable that we have to be intentional, right? You can't just jump head in, right? You have to have an end goal. You have to really have like a clear picture of what it is that you want to happen and how you're going to make that happen. Even if it doesn't happen how you thought it would, right? Because sometimes it just doesn't happen. But it's, I feel like we have these conversations, right? And this comes back to kind of why we are here in the first place. There's
Right.
so many conversations that happen about race and equity, race and equity, race and equity, but there's no work that actually ends up getting done. Or you have people who want to jump into doing the work, but then they haven't had the conversations to really identify what the issues are and what are the things that we want to address, right? And so I think it's just really important to have the conversation so that when we go in and we start to do the work, that we can be as intentional as possible, so that we can be as organized as possible, and so that we can ultimately be as productive as possible. Do I think that we're going to see huge change? I unfortunately not in my lifetime, and I'm praying that in my daughters and our children's lifetimes that they do. But I feel like this is where the work begins, and I think that we need to have these conversations so that we can figure out where it is we're trying to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's powerful, right? You ever been in a situation where like you're talking to someone, you're having a conversation, and it's like you start talking about something, and you're like, you know what I mean, right? And they start agreeing with you, they're nodding their head, and it seems like you're vibing back and forth. And then later on, you get to clarify your point, and they're like, oh wait, you were talking about that the whole time? I feel like that's the conversation we've been having with white folks, at least some of them.
Yep.
Like I'll name racism, racist acts, and when I say racism, there are a lot of white folks that think, KKK,
No,
lynchings.
thank your dad and you and your uncle and your brother.
Right. Think like, and here's the thing that is truly reprehensible about the whole thing, and it makes me think of what Jordy said yesterday, and that is that the need for these types of conversations has to happen, or the same people that stormed the Capitol got kids at their house who in 20 years will do the same thing again if we're not careful. And so the Revolutionary Act has got to be the way we attack this is not just by empowering our kids, and that is necessary, but it's also for my white counterparts to go into white neighborhoods because that's not where you're supposed to go, right? If you truly want to save, we got to go to these black neighborhoods because apparently that's where all the education is broken, right? But the people who stormed the Capitol, they got educated too. Some of them got master's degrees. Some of them were policemen,
Yep,
fire
absolutely.
chiefs, lawyers, doctors, right? And they stormed the Capitol because of ideologies that they were allowed to hold and they were reinforced all through education. Their doctorate degree didn't save them from racism.
Yeah. And what's funny? I was having this conversation one day. I think it was with my principal. When we have these like equity conversations in schools, in my staff, it's actually predominantly black. We have a predominantly black staff, which is super rare, but we do. And so it's always interesting to me that like when we go to these schools, or when I talk to people who work, teachers who work in schools, when they have these trainings, it's always white people coming in, but it's white people coming in to teach white people. I'm sorry, white people coming in to teach black people.
There it is.
Don't How you going to teach me about being me? Nobody has, like, you have not experienced. And so while you do have an outside lens, and I appreciate the effort, no, go teach your people, right? Because my people, we got it. We over here doing the work amongst ourselves to be better, to do better, and to push change.
Right.
But the change doesn't happen from you coming to teach me. It's you coming to teach your brother, having those conversations at the kitchen table. I have a friend, and I won't say her name, but I only got like two white friends. But I have a friend who, has to have these conversations consistently with her family. I mean, and they turn into big arguments because they have completely different ideologies and they don't
Mhm.
see it. They choose not to see it. But those are the conversations that need to continue to happen. And at some point, it might click, right? I don't know
Right.
if you remember the day we had this conversation in our clubhouse thing, and the lady came in and said, "I'm colorblind. I don't see color." And were you
Yes.
there?
Yeah.
And so, everyone was like, oh, damn, like, it's about to go down. And, I tried to tell her, like, ultimately, it is not that, because, like, my husband is black, I have black children, blah, 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 blah. And it goes to the thing, I have black friends. I'm not racist. And it's like, no, you're not colorblind. You see color, because everyone sees color. You just don't judge people by their color. But even that little comment, it took like 20 minutes for someone to be able to fully get through to her. And it ultimately did. And so I say that to say it is, white people have to have these conversations, and they need to continue to have these conversations and continue to have these conversations until they wear them down. Like, all right, fine, I'll finally listen and hear you. And then you'll get a little snippet of what it feels like to be black, trying to convince white people that racism exists, that
Yeah,
oppression exists.
yeah, absolutely. I think to your point that one of the interesting things is it is it is a symptom, if you will, of privilege to be able to get up from the table, right? I don't get to
Yep,
I don't get to get up from the table in these conversations.
yep,
So so when my white counterparts have the conversation with that white family member or that white friend who espouses biased and racist and prejudiced ideas, right? I'll say
yep,
racist because it's prejudice plus power, right? When they have those conversations and they get up from the table and leave, right? You're exercising a privilege that I don't have.
we don't get
You
to
are
walk away.
leaving, you're leaving a conversation that I can't ever have because they won't talk to me. Do you know how many white folks in my like at my place of work will refuse to talk to me about those things, right? And then will go to my school leader, will go to other people to complain about the angry, aggressive black man. Because
Yep,
what? I talk with my hands. I could offer five disclaimers. I
yep,
could I could introduce you to the ghost of Harriet Tubman, and I could tell you about my two PhDs if I had them, and you still would not agree that racism exists. But I need my white counterparts who see it to not get up from the table because you're the ones who can make that conversation happen in ways that I can't. And you can leverage your privilege in places that I can't.
yep. Someone said, dang, there was a question that was good.
Yeah, go back to it.
Teach folk, I think it was. It's like,
Yep.
how do you equip white folks and other people of color to lead these conversations, and lessons without perpetuating harm?
Wow.
You want
Wow.
to answer? I got some answers.
I got some things. Go ahead. You go first. I'll,
Okay,
I'll chime in.
okay. Um, Ultimately, when people walk into these spaces and these conversations, race is never a comfortable conversation to have, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
I'll speak about myself. I have a hard time talking about race with white people, especially if you're a white person that I care about, because I'm always fearful that something is gonna come out and make me say I can't fuck with you, can't mess with you.
Mm,
And that's a hard thing for me, right? But I have to step outside of that comfort zone of avoiding it and avoiding these conversations and have the conversations, right? People, we say this all the time. It is not our responsibility to equip white people with anything, right? The research is out there. The tools
mm,
are out there. The books are out. Like, the things are there. It is your responsibility to do the work. However, there are many people, not all, but there are many people who do not have a problem in helping to provide you and guide you. Guidance is
mm,
not a problem, but I'm not going to teach you. That is your responsibility to do that work. You'll have to be able to read through context and say, hey, how does this apply to me? How do my practices, how is it that I move? How does this relate to my life? Right? And then I can't do that for you. That's internal work that needs to be done. So we can't do, but what we can do, and we will talk about this a little bit later, we can provide resources and tools, right? We can provide you with, or people with, if I read a book, and it's not even black to white people, like, it's even to my peers, right? Hey, I read this dope book, like, you should check it out. Hey, this
right.
book talks about this. I know that's something you're struggling with. Check it out, right? But I feel like so often we get hit with so much pushback that it's almost like, yo, why am I about to go try and help this person? Like, if you ask for help, we will give the help. I don't think people have a problem with it, but I feel like so often we get these responses of these things don't exist, that it's like, yo, I'm not interested in helping you. If you want to learn, do your thing. But it is possible, and there's so much stuff that's out there where it's not even like it's. Sometimes it's just people being lazy. Like, If I'm doing research, I yesterday doing some work, found all of these different websites and resources in an hour. So
right?
it's like do the work, do the work.
I also think it's very interesting, right? Because the carnage and the mayhem that happened over the summer at the hands of whiteness
Yep,
led so many districts to put out, quote, anti-racist statements,
yep,
to post black boxes, and to say all the things that were conducive with the change that we've been talking about for so long. They went out and they crafted these statements and they put it up on their websites, and they said, I am about this work, I'm about this action. And it's so interesting because it seems like that was so far long ago, right? But you think about what it took to get there. It took us not only seeing Ahmaud Arbery running, just jogging, and being chased down by those white men. It took George Floyd calling out for his mother with a man's knee on his neck for 9 minutes. I'm rounding up there, but you get the idea. And we see all that, and then reactively now we want to begin to have the conversations. But where were you when the black kid in your class got put out, and now it wasn't in your educational space to learn anymore because you deemed him a problem? Where were
yep,
you when you wrote up and found out that all these black kids are now in special ed, departments because you couldn't deal with the cultural barrier, so now we got to medicate them, right? We look at all the carnage on the TV and we say, "Oh my gosh, we got to do something about that." But no, racism is in our institutions, and furthermore, racism is in our hearts. There's got
yeah,
to be an internal work that happens,
yep,
right? Where we begin to not look out there for racism and racist acts, where we begin to see what is it that I believe, right? It goes back to the old adage of how do you convince a fish that it's wet, right?
right,
How do you do that? Sam B said earlier, like these things are so ingrained in our society. Shout out to you, Sam. Um, these things are so ingrained. So how do you change them? And
yeah,
honestly, I want to speak with the level of humility here, right? I don't know. Like honestly, I don't know how it changes. But what I do know is that those kids who are downstairs in my house right now, my two babies, they're worth the fight. The
yes,
kids that I teach every day, they're worth the fight. And so to go back to the point about how we engage in these conversations, one, we got to lead with humility, right? And I'm talking all across the board, particularly our white counterparts who come in, and especially like if you're going to engage in this conversation and put yourself out there as a DEI, anti-racist, A-bar expert, right? There's got to be some type of level of humility because you don't have a lived experience that I do, right? And then secondly, if we are going to really be about this work, I say this with my school, you got to really count the cost, right? Because so many of them are trying to retrofit this work into their spaces, but they've been hiring racist teachers for the last 25 years and they got tenure and they ain't going
yep,
nowhere. So now that you're
true,
retroactively trying to fit this work into your spaces, what are you going to do with teacher so and so that's going to kick out every single kid because they're being disruptive and defiant?
yep.
What are you going to do
Someone
with your
said,
with their policies and procedures? No, you good.
Someone said professional development is important. Let me tell you, I ain't even gonna hold you. I'm done with professional development. Don't try to professionally develop me at all. I'm good because like you said, a big part of it is the work has to be internal, right? So what ultimately ends up happening in these professional development on race and equity, on all of these little, I'm calling them stupid professional developments because I have not sat through a good one yet, right? What ends up happening is, you know, you preaching to the choir. The people who want to be there, the people who want to, sorry y'all, it's mommy time. The people who, yeah, go ahead, go do whatever you want to do. The people who want to be, like, whatever. Don't burn my house down. The people who want to be there don't need to be there,
Yeah.
right? The ones who are listening don't need to be there. And so Yeah, professional development can be cool. A lot of the professional developments that we sit through ultimately are us sitting through things that could have been an email, a PDF, a PowerPoint that you could have slipped us with some resources, right? You
Absolutely.
have to want to do the work. It has to be internal. And the reality is professional developments aren't doing that. You know, if you
Right.
want to do the work, then you go to a professional development with just white people to learn how can I unlearn some of my whiteness? How can I give it
Right.
up? How can I
Right.
acknowledge my, you know what I mean? I sat through, Chris Emden came to my school, and then I think I was gonna go. We were gonna go into like an experience that you had, so I'm gonna share mine. So Chris Emden came to my school. He brought his book. The school brought copies of his book for every. You know, we had a black administration at my last school, as well. And but the staff wasn't as black as ours is now. And bought the book for all the staff. Basically said, read the book, whatever. He's gonna come in and do a PD. All they did was read the title for white folks who teach in the hood. And we're done. Literally, I'm listening to people have conversations in the teacher's lounge, and I'm like, oh, you just don't want nobody to call you out because you don't even know what this book, like, you have not read any of this book yet. You haven't even opened it. They haven't even given us the book, and you've already written it off, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
sat through this all day PD. And I'm in there, y'all know I'm a write. I be writing, taking all these dope color coordinating. No lie. This was the teachers texting on their phone the entire time, to the point where I text my principal like, nah, you gotta address this. Like, we're not
Mm-hmm.
gonna do this. We're not gonna just disrespect this black man. Like, as he comes in here to teach you how to help your student, like, we're not gonna do this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know. It's just like, for me, I'm good with the professional developments. Like, I'm good. I'm good. I could do without it. Like, provide those spaces to people who need it, but like, unfortunately, the ones who are listening are not the ones who need it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so many great things in the comments. Shout out to you if you just joined us. We've been dealing with the conversation about race and equity in schools. I should have pinned it to the bottom. That's all right. But what I want to make sure I highlight in this is when we talk about professional developments, right? They're usually viewed through a lens in our schools of checking a box, right? Did we do a certain amount of hours, right? So we have to reimagine that, right? What if our schools actually had, like, especially in charter schools, we got people called dean directors of culture. But what if the directors of culture were actually going through our classrooms with a evaluation of our practices along the lines of equity? Did we are our students represented on the walls and in our curriculum? Are our books, right? Our directors of curriculum, are our books representative of the pantheon of Black literature, indigenous literature that's out there? What they'll tell you is, I didn't know. Ignorance is not an excuse at this point, because when you wanted to look up that recipe that you put on there without no seasoning,
Listen,
you Googled that thing and you found it, didn't you?
right?
Right? And so we have to allow for uh, we can't feign ignorance in this, and we have to do the work of recognizing that if we're going to really professionally develop people, it has to be tied to some level of accountability and honestly some level of incentive. What
Yeah.
if your percentage of your raise was tied to equitable practices? What if I started coming for people's wallets in this because I really believed it? Right now, some people will say, well, listen, but now some people are going to be performative. They already are, right? But I care about the my kids who are going to come through these systems, and at the end of it, what's going to be taken from them? What happens if
Yeah.
we don't act? What happens if we don't try? Right? The risk at the end of that is so much greater than if we tried now to do something completely radical.
Yep.
But I don't think people are ready for that conversation, because in our schools we're so committed to doing the same thing, right? The pandemic has taught us that. We're
Yep.
so committed to the
Absolutely.
same thing. Has that been your experience too?
I mean, yeah. Like, I was just gonna ask you, like, what are some things that you're doing right now during this time, like, to push equity, make sure that like your practices are equitable. But yeah, like, ultimately, I'm talking to teachers, and they're like a couple teachers in my school who like make me cringe. And so, like, if I get an email about them, I jump on it. Like, I'm ready. Like, when we go talk to them, because I know that your classroom is not equitable, because I know what you think about those kids. You know how I know what you think about them kids? Because I heard how you talk to them kids, right?
Yes, indeed.
And so for me, I'm just like, and I've literally been like, as a students will come to me, and I'm like, I always push my kids to talk to their teachers themselves, because I hate when teachers come to me and I'm like, but the kid, I see them every day. They didn't come talk to me, you know. But
Hmm.
kids have come and said, well, I didn't have internet. I sent the teacher a message, but she marked me absent, or she gave me a zero for the day, or da da da. And I'm just like, we are in a pandemic. Like, and I know that, and I always fight with this, like the balance between, like grace and holding our kids accountable. But like, I always have to push towards grace, especially now during a pandemic, because the kids are going through so much. You know what I'm saying? And so, what do you think what are some of the things that you do to make sure that your classroom is like equitable as possible? Because the reality is we will not, during this time. I mean, equity is really hard to completely reach anyway, right? Full
Right.
equity. But what are you doing now to kind of make your classroom as equitable as possible?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So from the simple things like critically self-reflect. How did I handle a situation when a kid came into my Zoom and wasn't responding? Like they might not have been there, right? Did I did I immediately go to, oh well, that kid, you know, they're not turning in any work, but maybe the story is that kid is taking care of three siblings. Their mom leaves. They're doing a bunch of work at the house to even survive in the midst of a pandemic, and I'm mad that they didn't turn in a couple of math problems, right? Learning takes place outside of the classroom, so I got to have a level of humility that says, nah, that person is probably going through a lot, and I'm going to assume the best even when I don't want to, right?
Yeah.
But I also think one of the biggest things that I've been able to do is myself and two colleagues, co-conspirators. We got involved in a teacher-led pantry at my school to fight food insecurity. And so every single Friday, we go out and we deliver to over, I think it's up to like almost 80 families now in our school.
Wow.
And and listen, the women that I work with, they are incredible individuals. Um, they started this, and I joined them along the journey, and it has been the most rewarding experience to be able to see kids light up because you actually cared about them outside of what they can turn in on a piece of paper or a Google slide
Yeah.
or what they can say to you in the chat on Zoom, right? So if you guys are, have that in your heart and you guys want to partner, please follow Panther Pantry 2020. We're trying to do tremendous work in the neighborhood of Trenton, and we'd love it if people could partner with us. But how
Yeah,
about
that's so
yourself?
dope. That's first of all, that's dope. My school does, they do like food for the kids. So I personally don't do it, but the school does. We have Wednesdays are all remote, and so on Tuesdays, all of the kids go home with a bag that has lunch and breakfast for the next day. And sometimes they also do it on the weekend. So Friday they'll go home with a bag. But in my classroom, I teach math, and so like it's been tough. Like I'm more hands on. Like I can walk around the classroom quick 15 seconds and like, okay, you and you, let's go over there and work. Y'all do it. Like I can't do that on Zoom. So one of the things that I began to do, and I've been trying to push some of my other teachers to do, but it is work, and so they don't necessarily want to do that work. I make videos. So for every single lesson, I myself have made a video to walk them through like several questions. Then I also give them those questions printed out, like so it's already written, right? So like when you come, you don't need like I try to give them things in different formats. Sometimes I'll create PowerPoints where they have all the work there, but then they also have the option of like doing it step by step. It's very tough, I give them alternative assignments sometimes. My kids are allowed to retake pretty much everything that they do. Literally,
Absolutely.
pretty much everything. I was always that way anyway, but definitely now. And so the videos help them. You miss class, you know that there's a video up. Go watch the video. When it comes to homework, I have like a homework calendar that's posted online. So if you miss a day, like you always know what the assignments are. Like I just try to give them as much access to as much that I can as possible, so that they can do things on their own time. Like you don't know how many times I've had kids unmute and like it's so loud in their background that I've had to mute them
Oh
and
my
write them like I
gosh.
can't hear. Like write me in the chat, you know.
Yeah.
So it's been really tough. I mean, and this is what got me. One of my kids got COVID, right?
Mm.
And we knew a student got it, but we didn't know who. And so she was in my class. She came in on Monday into class of last week, and I was like, I asked a question, and she unmuted and she answered, and I was like, yo, she sounds crazy, like she sounded sick, you know. And
Hmm.
so I wrote her on the side because we use Remind, and well, I use Remind, and I wrote her on the side. I'm like, hey girl, like you good? You sound like getting sick, and she said, no, I have COVID. I'm like, girl, why are you in class? She didn't even feel like she could afford to miss any of her classes
Mm.
without
Mm.
falling behind enough. And I'm like, what kind of system do we have
There it
where
is.
you can't even be sick and miss a day of class so that you could get better because your teachers will not understand. I was like, girl, if you don't log off this Zoom and go to sleep, go take a nap, go rest, like we will deal with the work when you come back. But like ultimately, this is the system that we have, like where, you know, it is not equitable, you know. And I'm talking about somebody who's sick. Imagine kids who don't have internet. You know, I had a kid who had to go to the library every day. And I'm
Yeah.
like, y'all, we have hotspots. Y'all know this kid is going to the library every day. Did anybody reach out and say, hey, let's give him a hotspot so that he doesn't have to leave his house in the middle of the winter to walk to the library to do X, Y, and Z? Like, I don't know. So I feel like there's a lot more that can be done. I saw someone say, ask the kids. I do social emotional like any day. We
Yeah.
can do it. If I feel it is happening, I feel like something's off, you know, and then I try to do on Wednesdays as well. But I'm always asking them, like, y'all, what can I do to help you? Like,
Yeah.
how do y'all feel about the class? Let's do a quick temperature check. Like, do y'all feel like y'all prepared? Do you need more resources? What is it that I can provide to you? And like, it is exhausting, you know, it's exhausting and I'm tired. But ultimately, if I know that it will help my kids, I'm gonna do it for them because I know that we're all struggling, but I'm an adult. So I know how, like, I've learned to handle my struggle a little different. And these are kids who are navigating not only living in a pandemic, but then the things that they deal with at home outside of the pandemic, the things they used to come into the schoolhouse or the school building to get away from, they can't do that.
Absolutely. It's
So
absolutely, and the reasons that they say them, right? Like the reasons that they give for like things like coming back into the building,
yep,
right? So learning loss, right? And it's like, hold on, wait a minute. But like in order to define something as a loss, you have to know where it started. And there was inequities prior to this, and now you're just
exactly.
coming to the reality. So now, so are you weaponizing my oppression against me to get me to go back into an oppressive system with the inequities that exist, and on top of that, there's a
Yep.
pandemic that disproportionately affects me. But you're telling me it's the best thing for me to be in the building. It's just it's amazing, right?
And
Um,
ultimately, what are they learning? Sorry.
yeah,
Ultimately,
you're good.
what are they learning, right? Like I said this to my principal, and he was like low key, he was offended though. He was like, "Han, if you're wilding right now," and if you don't know me, I have a really good relationship with my principal, so I can be very candid, and sometimes like I miss boundaries, you know. But I said to him, I'm like, you know, y'all trying? No, they sent an email saying that we were going back into the, well, they're trying to go back into the building, push kids to go back, whatever. And I said, so are you trying to kill us? That was my actual text to him. I was like, y'all trying to kill us? And so he came up to my room because sometimes like if I start off one way, he's like, nah, we can't have this conversation via text, like, you know. So he came up and we were talking, and I was just like, you know, I get that people feel, because a lot of times it's over the principal's head, right? But I get that people feel that the kids are losing, and they are, right? Normal, you know, things that they would be learning right now, they're not able to retain at the same capacity they were before because life has hit, right?
Right.
But let's reflect. I teach high school. What are they really learning in high school that they will take with them? What classes are they taking that are valuable to them? Not
Right.
financial literacy, you know,
Right.
not
Right.
not you know, economics that they might take senior year for a half a year, right? We teaching these kids class. First of all, history that is false. So let's start there. we're
Facts.
you know we're maybe English, that might be the like most valuable class to them because when they go, if they choose to go to college, they have to write papers. The math that they're learning is not relevant to their lives at this moment,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So it's like, what the classes, some of the classes they take in Spanish 3, and walk out and still can't speak Spanish, understand Spanish. So it's like, what are they really losing?
Right.
Because what were they
Right.
gaining before? So I just feel like the curriculum is so off that it's like that it's not going to hurt them to take a step back and say, like, let's focus on their social emotional. Let's make sure that they're good before we try to jump out the window.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sam said To Kill a Mockingbird.
Appreciate you saying that. Yeah, there's so much that could be said about that. I wanted to, because we got about a minute left before Instagram don't let us be great anymore, and I wanted to plug kind of what we're doing to really see some effects in this area. So, why don't you talk a little bit about the coming workshop we're doing?
Okay, so I'm gonna do this really quickly. So Bobby and I are working on a one-day intensive to. We keep talking about, oh, we're talking, and we're not seeing any action. We're going to these PDs and we're walking away with nothing tangible. So we are doing a one-day intensive to one, have some conversation, reflect on our practices, but also to provide tools, tips, things that you can take away and try in your classes, whether you're elementary, middle school, high school, math, English, social studies, whatever. You will all be able to walk away with something. It is free, 99. You don't have to pay anything. All you have to do is show up. But our goal is really, really, really to provide you guys with resources and tools to use, so that the work can begin with you.
You'll see that on our Instagrams coming up very shortly. Mark the date down. It's March 19th. Thank y'all for joining us.
Thanks,
Tap
guys.